The river that started a war. The Ohio River Valley in the mid-1700s was a place made of shadows and promises, vast forests whispering with wind, waterways glimmering like silver veins, and nations led upon nations. To the French, it was the spine of their empire in North America, connecting Canada to Louisiana. To the British colonies, hungry and swelling with settlers, it was the future, land to farm, trade routes to control, a frontier to claim. But to the indigenous nations who lived there, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, the Lenape, the Abenaki, and dozens more, it was home, sacred and ancient long before Europeans carved maps through their world. War would come because each side believed the valley belonged unquestionably to them. But no valley belongs to one dream. And no dream survives untouched by empires. In 1753, the first sparks glowed. British colonial governor Robert Dinwiddie of Virginia sent a young, ambitious militia officer, George Washington, barely 21 years old, to deliver a diplomatic warning to the French at Fort Le Boeuf, leave the Ohio Valley. The French politely refused. Washington returned with a sense of destiny burning in his chest. He believed himself chosen for something great, and the frontier seemed the stage. But destiny, like war, is rarely gentle. 2. Jumonville Glen, the shot that shattered peace. Spring 1754. Rain fell in icy sheets, turning the wilderness into a dripping maze of green and mud. Washington led a small force of Virginians through the woods, accompanied by the Mingo leader Tanacharison, known to the English as the Half-King. They found a small French detachment camped in a ravine, Jumonville's party, sent with diplomatic messages, not armies. What happened next remains debated even to this day. But the forest does not care about truth, it remembers only echoes. A spark. A shot. A cry. Gunfire crashed through the trees. Washington's men and their native allies poured bullets down the slope. When the smoke thinned, French officer Joseph Coulon de Jumonville lay dying. Tanacharison stepped forward, lifted his tomahawk, and ended the man's life. "Thou art not yet dead, my father," he whispered before striking. A message to the French, a curse born of older rivalries. Washington wrote a report calling it a victory. France called it an assassination. Empires do not forgive one another. The French and Indian War had begun, before either side fully realized it. 3. Fort Necessity, the first humiliation. Washington hurriedly built a crude circular palisade in a soggy meadow, Fort Necessity, its very name a confession of fear. On July 3, 1754, a French force of several hundred surrounded the fort. Rain pounded down like a punishment from the sky. The Virginians' muskets misfired. Powder turned to wet paste. Mud swallowed everything. By nightfall, Washington surrendered. The French terms accused him, incorrectly, of assassinating Jumonville. Washington, unable to read French, signed. Though he did not know it, the document would be reprinted across Europe, igniting outrage and pride. A young colonial officer had admitted to murder, and empires sharpened their knives. Washington returned to Virginia bruised, humiliated, and wiser. His name now traveled on ships across the Atlantic, whispered in London drawing rooms and Parisian salons. The world was tilting toward war. For empires collide, 1755 to 1756. In London, British leaders refused to believe the colonists could not simply march into the frontier and claim it. So they sent the proud, stubborn General Edward Braddock, scarred from old European victories. He brought polished redcoats, cannons, drums, banners, and a fatal ignorance of North American warfare. As Braddock's army marched west toward Fort Duquesne, his line stretched like a red ribbon through the trees. Washington, serving as a volunteer aide, warned him that the French and their native allies would attack from the forests, unseen. Braddock did not listen. On July 9, 1755, the woods erupted. War whoops, musket flashes, and invisible death poured from every side. The British line crumbled. Horses screamed. Men stumbled over the wounded and dying. Braddock fell with a bullet through his lung. Washington rode through the chaos, his coat torn by bullets, 2 horses shot beneath him. Later he wrote that it felt as if, by the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I have been protected beyond human probability. It was a disaster for Britain. And across the Atlantic, Europe slid toward a catastrophe of its own, the 7 Years' War, where every great empire would duel for supremacy. The conflict would consume continents. Scars on the frontier. What followed were years of terror for settlers and native nations alike. French Allied warriors struck deep into British territory, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, burning cabins, raiding villages, reclaiming land taken from their ancestors. For many tribes, this was not a European war but an indigenous one, a long-delayed struggle to resist encroachment and preserve homelands. British colonists, desperate and afraid, lashed out violently, sometimes attacking native communities that had nothing to do with the conflict. Fear breeds monsters in every war. The frontier bled. 6. The World Burns, 1756 to 1757. By 1756, the wider 7 Years' War erupted, with Britain against France, Prussia against Austria, Russia marching west, Spain watching, waiting. Battles raged in Europe, India, Africa, the Caribbean, the Pacific. But in North America, France held the advantage. Their general, Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, arrived and began a streak of victories. Fort Oswego, 1756, fell, giving France control of Lake Ontario. Fort William Henry, 1757, surrendered after a brutal siege. In the chaotic aftermath, some native warriors attacked British prisoners, a tragedy Montcalm tried but failed to stop. British morale sank. Colonists whispered that France might drive them into the sea. The British Empire cracked under its own weight. All empires do, until a stronger fist forces them back together. 7. A man called Pitt. In 1757, Britain found that fist. William Pitt the Elder rose to lead war strategy in London. He was fiery, brilliant, relentless. He understood two truths. 1. France was overstretched. 2. Victory in North America would shape the future of the world. He poured money into the colonies, funded new regiments, replaced failed commanders, and ordered the Royal Navy to choke French supply lines. Under Pitt, a sleeping empire woke with a roar. The French, outnumbered and undersupplied, felt the tide turning against them. 8. 1758, the year of reversal. British armies marched with new confidence, guided by leaders who understood the land better than Braddock ever had. General John Forbes methodically advanced on Fort Duquesne, building supply depots and roads as he went, slow, careful, unstoppable. The French, unable to hold the fort, burned it and retreated. Forbes rebuilt it as Fort Pitt, planting the first seeds of what would later become Pittsburgh. Far to the north, British forces seized Louisbourg, the gateway to the St. Lawrence River. And at Fort Frontenac, a small British force captured France's vital supply depot, severing the lifeline to the western Great Lakes. Momentum shifted. For the first time, British colonists believed victory was possible. 9. Quebec, the battle on the plains. By 1759, Pitt set his eyes on the heart of New France, Quebec, perched high on cliffs overlooking the St. Lawrence. General James Wolfe, only 32, pale and sickly but fiercely ambitious, led the attack. Montcalm, proud and experienced, prepared to defend the city he loved for months. The British bombarded Quebec from ships and artillery. Montcalm refused to break. Then Wolfe made a daring gamble. In the darkness of night, his soldiers climbed a narrow, unguarded path up the cliffs. By dawn, they stood on the Plains of Abraham, a wide field just outside the city walls. Montcalm, shocked but unshaken, marched his army out to meet them. The two armies clashed in a short, brutal battle. Wolfe fell first, shot in the wrist, then the stomach, then the chest. He lived only long enough to hear the cry, "They run! See how they run!" The French were retreating. Montcalm was also mortally wounded. When told he would die, he whispered, "So much the better, I shall not see the surrender of Quebec." Both generals died heroes in their nations. Quebec fell. New France trembled. The final blows, 1760 to 1763. The French position collapsed rapidly. Montreal surrendered in 1760. French supply ships were destroyed at sea. Indigenous nations, seeing France's power fading, negotiated peace or neutrality with the British. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed. France ceded Canada to Britain. Spain received Louisiana from France. Britain gained dominance over North America east of the Mississippi. The French and Indian War ended. But peace is not the end of conflict. It is only a curtain hiding the next act. 11. Aftermath, the Great Unraveling. For Britain, victory came with a terrible price: debt. To pay for the war and defend its new lands, the British government passed taxes on the colonies, the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Townshend duties. Colonists who had once cheered Britain now felt betrayed. We fought. We bled. And now you tax us. The seeds of the American Revolution sprouted in the soil of the French and Indian War. For indigenous nations, the outcome was grimmer. With France gone, Britain no longer needed native allies and began pushing aggressively into their lands. The Great Resistance leader Pontiac united tribes in 1763 to defend their homelands, launching Pontiac's War, a fierce revolt born from broken promises. And for George Washington, who had fired the war's first shots and survived its disasters, the conflict carved the path that would later lead him to revolution, and then to the emerging American nation. Empires rise through wars they think they control. Empires fall through consequences they never expect. 12. Epilogue, the war that made a continent. The French and Indian War reshaped the world. It ended France's empire in Canada. It expanded Britain's empire to its peak. It set the stage for the American Revolution. It transformed indigenous nations' relationships with both European powers. It linked the Ohio River Valley, once peaceful and wild, to the fates of global empires. The war did not decide who owned America. It decided who believed they did. But the forests, the rivers, the mountains, they belong to no empire. They endure beyond the ambitions of kings and generals. They remember the thunder of muskets, the cries of warriors, the smoke rising from burning forts. And they whisper the truth no empire ever learns. Land can be claimed, but never owned.